The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago.
Welcome to the Chicago Bar Association's Justice and Law Weekly. I'm Dan Cotter, President of the Chicago Bar Association. Police misconduct is a troubling issue in America. How can we stop it? Are there any solutions? The National Bar Association established a task force to develop strategies to end police brutality. Pamela Means, President of the National Bar Association, is here to continue the discussion on this important initiative. Ms. Means is a partner at Thompson Coburn LLP, the largest law firm in St. Louis, Missouri. She was the first African American in the firm's history to be elevated from associate to partner. Ms. Means concentrates her practice in civil litigation. Thank you for joining us, President Means.
Thank you for having me back.
And let's continue the discussion. So on the previously we were talking about some of the issues and what caused you to have the police brutality initiative. Can you tell us about that initiative?
Yeah, our initiative is really fourfold. It is an investigation/advocacy piece that deals with what we call the open records and advocating for the issue to be dissolved. The second piece is an educational piece. It's the Know Your Rights Because It Could Save Your Life form. The third piece is federal legislative reform, or legislative reform on the local, state, and federal level. And then the last piece is a Police Brutality Institute that we created to help lawyers who are interested in practicing in the civil rights area know how to do it perfectively. So those are really the pieces that we focus on because the experts in the area said those are the areas where gaps were.
And let's dig into each of those. One of the initiatives you mentioned was to educate the public about their constitutional rights if they encounter the police. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. Dan, as we talked about before, one of the most critical things that we can do is help to save people's lives. And one of the ways you can help save people's lives is through education. And sometimes people don't do because they don't know, and they don't do because they don't understand. And so what we did is we actually developed a card, and on the card we put the constitutional rights on the card. There's a constitutional right under the Fifth Amendment that you don't have to talk to an officer if you don't want to. You have a right to ask for an attorney. In this little card, we have put in like one little summary, you're right. And then we teach individuals that there's a difference in how you behave with the cops when you're being detained. You can't say to an officer, I don't have to talk. You can say I don't have to talk to you, but you have to obey what they're saying. We teach them that you have a right under, and it's on this card, that you have a right to actually videotape an officer as long as you're not interfering with them. They do not have a right to take your stuff. You have to give them permission if you're not being detained. They don't have a right to search things. And we train individuals to do this because, if you're on the defense side of this, the worst thing you want to do is to give up your case to someone. So we tell individuals through this card, and also when we're speaking with them, keep your mouth closed. Wait to speak with your attorney. Those are your rights. Those are not bad things. And sometimes cops, yes, they have the right to lie. They have a right to stand before you because their right is to investigate and get information out of you. So don't ever think you're having a friendly conversation with a cop, but actually, know that everything you say will be held against you. One of the most important things on this card that we say, which is the last line, and this is where you really sometimes should start. If you should ask the officer, am I being detained? And if they say no, say, I want to leave. Am I free to leave? Please let me know so I can immediately leave and go about my business. And the reason for that is that you have to assess the situation again of what's being done. Also in these Know Your Rights, we also talk about the actual issue that is happening within the state is happening in. And as I said earlier, we choose to go into the 25 states that we've targeted as we believe states that have major high concentration of police brutality going in. And we bring in these experts to talk to them about what do you have to do when you're pulled over by a traffic stop? Look, you don't have to roll your window all the way down. You actually can roll your window halfway. And some of those cops that actually, unless you're being detained, that bust your window out when they're doing that, don't have a right to do that under the law. But it depends on the situation. So we take them through scenarios and we actually say, okay, what's the response to this? And children really love it when we do that. So it's a part of that education. But then we also make a call for prosecutors to do what's right when it comes to the time where you find cops not doing the right thing. Don't look at this as your officer who actually brings you evidence. Apply the law to what appears to be a criminal. And you then not make them guilty until proven innocent, but treat them like you would treat anybody else under the law. We disseminate these cards actually, at the Know Your Rights Forum, but we also have a pamphlet, and on the back of that pamphlet also is information. We tell people to take this card, put it in your pocket, or tape it to the visor of your windshield. And when the cops start to, okay? When they start to question you, this is what we tell them in the Know Your Rights. We say, take out your video camera, start taping, and start reciting this card. And we tell individuals, look, you have a right to videotape the officer, but you have to do it in a manner that's consistent with the law. And we disseminate information to help educate them. And one of the things we disseminate is, there's a website called F the Police. Dan, it doesn't mean what you think. It actually means Film the Police. And it's done by this gentleman named Michael Cord, who is a lawyer out of Philadelphia. And what he did was put down steps to teach you how to properly film the police. The ACLU has an app that they're developing where you can actually download it when you're stopped by the cops. It can send a message to 5 of your friends, tell them where you are. Wow. So you should, 1, get the download app, 2, know how you can film the cop, then 3, ask the cop and understand whether you were being detained or not being detained. Know that when a cop pulls you over for a traffic stop, do you have to give the officer your license? Yes. If a cop stops you on the street, though, do you have to give him your license, Dan?
The answer is probably no, right?
You don't, because there is no obligation by you unless you're being detained for you to actually give an officer your ID. You have to give him your name. You don't have to tell him where you live, but you have to give him your name, and that's about it. But sometimes what we learn, Dan, is that even though these are your constitutional rights, that you can do all of this, right, and you can do it perfectly, and the cops still will abuse you. And that happens a lot in Black communities. I don't know if you saw the video of the young man who the officer had pulled over, and he had asked him to show him his ID. As the gentleman was going for his ID, he started shooting him.
Right.
And he said, "Why are you shooting me?"
Right.
Okay?
I did see that.
"Why are you shooting me?" And after it was over with, he said, "I thought I saw something." When we encounter young African American children, they say to us, "Miss Means, I hear what you're saying, but I can do everything you're saying and I can still get shot." And I say to them, my lawyers say, "Look, your job is to make it home safe." But I say to them, I'm angry that that's where you are, and that's why I'm working to change the laws.
Well, great. You mentioned the Know Your Right cards, and you mentioned the pamphlet as well that the cards contained on. In addition to disseminating them at the meetings and in the 25 locations you've been at, it's such great information. Where can the public get this information, and where is it available?
It's available actually on the NBA website at www.nationalbar.org. You can download it, you can take it, you can disseminate it, you can take the NBA's name off of it because it's just your rights. And you can actually disseminate that and make sure everybody has a copy of it.
Okay. And in addition to the Know Your Rights, what's contained in the pamphlet? Can you tell us a little bit about the pamphlet itself?
Absolutely. What we did is, because when we go on the Know Your Rights, Dan, we actually pass out the pamphlet so that people can understand the initiative. And in the first part of the initiative, we talk about the investigative piece. And that's the piece where, there is a broken trust in minority communities and the cops. They do not believe that police are protecting and preserving them. They really believe that police are policing them. And when you have the nature of that relationship, even if a cop is good, even if a cop is doing the right thing, there is a mistrust that you have to get past. And sometimes the solution to that mistrust is bringing in a third-party independent person to investigate. That's the U.S. government. And some people have debated whether or not the U.S. government can come in and investigate at the same time. There's nothing in the Constitution that doesn't allow them to do it. As in fact, that's what they did when the young men got burned in Mississippi. They came in and took over an investigation because it was tainted, and they could not have America not trusting what was happening. So we have done open records requests throughout the 25 states, as I mentioned. In that open records request, we basically ask for cases of brutality so we can compile a report. I thought I could get it done in a year, Dan, but it's not. But you want to do it right, so we have been requesting that. Sometimes we've had to sue. On the basis of trying to get the information. So that's part one, and that we lay out in the pamphlet the 25 states that we're looking at, Chicago, Illinois being one of them, because the police brutality rate here is very high. But actually the #1 police brutality state is actually Tennessee. Wow. So what's happening in McKinney is not surprising to us at all. In addition, we talk about our advocacy piece, that we will go out and advocate and meet with the mayors and meet with the city council to let them understand that we want to be partners. We're pointing out a problem, but we're also offering solutions. Also, part three is the legislative reform. And what we've done is we really researched this issue. We've talked to former cops, current cops. We talked to people that practice on both sides of the aisle. And what we have determined is that you need laws that are on 3 levels. One, you need a law that talks about stricter mental health testing, stricter mandatory diversity training, mandatory race training. That's a law that a local government can put into an ordinance and put into their policy book. It could be passed right away. Their thing is, because we understand that sometimes if you put too much in one law or have one body do it, they'll say, I can't do all of that. Right. So on the state level, we deal with that trust issue, independent investigation, independent prosecution. We're recommending that it goes to the state's attorney's office, and that the state's attorney have 2 investigators to actually look at and review the case, bring them back a report, and then the state's attorney makes a decision, and that's one removed, and you can trust that decision. On a federal level, what we say is that often people hear the sayings of officers saying a lot, they reach for my gun, stop trying to terrorize me. I thought that they were going to, I saw, in the St. Louis case, you heard the officer say he looked like the Incredible Hulk. He looked like an animal. He charged me, so I feared for my life. I did what I could. That comes from a legal standard established by the Supreme Court. There is a standard that says an officer has the ability to elevate force to that degree that he or she believes is reasonable in order to stop the danger against you or themselves. So an officer has, in the law, we call that arbitrary and capricious. And so because an officer has discretion of how much force he or she can use, we are saying, because it's a standard set by the Supreme Court, you and I know that a state can't change that. Right. A local government can change that. U.S. Congress has to change that. So what we've said is, U.S. Congress, institute a law that puts a standard and a definition, a succinct definition to what it means for excessive force and what it is for elevation of force. Put a standard. Why reach for your gun when you could have reached for your taser? Why take a person down? Why train to go for the mask and not for the leg and not for the arm? And so we're saying, put some definition to that. And also the law we're saying is body cameras, because the reason we're having this conversation, Dan, is because we see it all over the internet, right? But the National Bar Association goes a step further. And what we say is if you're gonna pass a camera law, put some penalties to it. Make it a crime for an officer to tamper with the law. And why do we say that, Richard? Why do we say that, Dan? Because there was a case in New Jersey, this guy by the name of Marcus Jeter, who had a fight with his girlfriend. Him and his girlfriend got in this major fight. The police was called. The police told him to leave and go calm down. They then came back after him, pulled him over the side of the road. In the police camera, Dan, what you could see is a cop yelling, let go of my gun, let go of my gun, stop grabbing my gun, stop resisting arrest. Then you see him drag him out of the car, stop resisting arrest, stop resisting arrest. At this time, Marcus Jeter was 26 years old. They arrested Marcus Jeter, and the prosecutor said, we're gonna prosecute him to the fullest extent of the law because we have to make an example out of him. He went and hired a lawyer. And the lawyer, he said to his lawyer, look, that's not how it happened. When the cops pulled me over, I had my hands in the air. He hired a cop that looked like, he had an officer that looked, attorney that looked like me. The attorney didn't believe him. See, the attorney did an open records request. And lo and behold, Dan, there was another video. There had been another police car
From a
that had
different angle?
pulled at a different angle right in front of him. As you see this cop, Dan, saying, "Let go my gun, let go my gun," you see him punching Marcus Jeter in the face. As he's punching Marcus Jeter and yelling, "Let go my gun," Marcus' hands are up in the air like this.
Wow.
In the air.
Wow.
And the prosecutor said she had never saw that videotape. 3 cops involved.
Wow.
One of them was a cop of color. The cop busting him in the face, cop of color. One cop, they had hid the videotape. One cop was forced to resign. Another cop, the other 2 cops were prosecuted. When people say video cameras don't matter, they do matter.
Sure.
And Marcus Jeter is out now, living a full life because there was a video camera. There should be a penalty to tampering with them. The last one is, you know, Dan, if you and I went into the 7-Eleven, which we wouldn't do, and I told you I was gonna rob the 7-Eleven, but I ended up shooting the person behind the counter, I'd go to jail for murder, and you go to jail for felony murder.
Right.
We say, make it a law, Congress, felony police brutality. Make it against the law for another officer to stand, Dan, and watch another police commit police brutality and do nothing about it. I know the case you saw in South Carolina with the officer who said the guy grabbed for his taser.
Right.
Right? The NBA didn't focus on him. We focused on the officer, Mr. Shabaham, who stood there and watched the other officer drop something on the ground. When you read his report, there was nothing in the report about that. And we said that's unacceptable. If there was no camera, here's how it would have went, the narrative. It was a regular traffic stop that went bad after he grabbed for my taser. And no document they put together would have ever disclosed what really happened. The National Bar Association has actually drafted the laws.
Okay.
We've been advocating them to local, state, and federal level. You can find them on our website. Okay. Download them. You don't have to give us credit. We just want them passed. The fourth part is, and that's laid out in the pamphlet, is you find a lot of lawyers representing individuals in these cases. And sometimes lawyers know what they're doing, and sometimes they don't. I don't like bad lawyers either. But sometimes you have to be a part of the solution. So one of the solutions is we created a Police Brutality Institute. And the goal of that institute is to get seasoned lawyers, individuals who have represented like Rodney King, John Burris, who's a part of it, actually come together and put educational materials together and teach people and talk about how do you really advocate. And there's a difference between being an advocate and doing advocacy. Right. And lawyers should know the difference between that, because we know as lawyers there are ethical rules that govern how we should behave ourselves when we are actually representing someone. In addition, you should know whether to file the case in state court or federal court, because there's going to be a different standard. This institute deals with that. It really does. It doesn't give you a cookie cutter or how to do a case, but it talks about how to do civil rights law and how to do it effectively, because you don't sometimes make money off of these cases,
right.
But we need lawyers who are going to do it.
We sure do. And so you've gone through kind of the 4 initiatives, and want to take the audience back a little bit.
Yes.
You'd mentioned open record request. So
Yeah.
what is an open record request?
An open records request is we call it sometimes a Sunshine Act request. It's a document that you draft up that you have to do under statute. So in that particular state, we look for the statute that will allow us to get documents officially from an entity. And you send it to that entity, and they have a certain number of days that they have to compile that information for you and give it to you. And so you write that up, and what we wrote up is you put in there information that you particularly want that you can get. You're not allowed to get some information. Sure. If information is actually covered under litigation, that's some information that you can't get. So there's some restrictions sometimes, and it varies from state to state.
And sometimes, as we both know in the legal practice, some FOIA requests, some open records requests go unanswered, some are fought, right?
Absolutely. You and I both know that most of the time, and because I'm a defense lawyer, I actually don't do the plaintiff sides for a living. I get a FOIA request. I'm trying to figure out how not to answer the request. And so I do want to educate people on knowing that sometimes not giving the answer is not because somebody is racist or anything like that. That's the nature of the practice of law.
It is.
My job is not to make your life easy. It's to make my client happy, right? So
The NBA chose 25 locations.
Yeah.
And how are those locations picked? Can you go into a little detail on that?
yeah, that's an excellent question, Dan. Because we only had a year to do this, I believe in trying to set goals that are reachable and that are tangible. My two experts, one has been practicing Terry Wiley for 28 years on the prosecutor side. Daryl Washington, who's been practicing 23 years representing families, both set out and research states that had high population of African Americans, because what we were seeing is a whole number of unarmed African Americans being killed by the police. And as we looked at the statistics, African American men are 9 times more likely to be killed. So we looked for areas that had high concentrations of African American or minorities, and who had a high population or reporting in the media of police misconduct cases. And there's studies that are released by the FBI every 2 to 3 years. They looked at those studies and they came up with a list of 25 states and then 25 cities, and that's how they were selected.
And you've been to just about every one, if not every one so far, right?
I have not been to all of them. I've been to almost about 20 of them. We're also headed to Cleveland, Ohio, and that is a big state that's dealing with the issue. You have the Tamir Rice issue there, but you also have the issue that some people don't talk about anymore. That's a young man that was killed in the Walmart. And for me, that one weighs heavy on my heart even more than the other. And I'll tell you why, because I don't know if you know about the case of the white young man who went into a Walmart in South Carolina, who attempted to steal a cash register. He terrorized the whole store. He led the police on a high-speed chase. He then tried to grab an officer's gun 3 times, and he was tased. But then you have Mr. Scott in Ohio. He's standing in a Walmart, leaning on a toy gun, talking to his girlfriend on the phone, and he was shot down. There's a difference. When you are in an open carry state, which Ohio is, you have a white man that walks outside and he's pointing a gun at the crowd and the police calm him down. But you have a 12-year-old boy who's playing with a toy gun in a park, and within 0.06 seconds, they gun him down.
Right.
That tells you why it is de-escalation of force and race training is necessary. And it doesn't make those cops that did it bad. It doesn't make those cops evil. It's questionable of whether they should have been with guns in their hand, and whether or not we, as a police force and as a public, have demanded enough to require enough of the people who do risk their lives every day. So we've been to about 20 of them.
And you've also sent preservation of evidence letters. Could you tell a little bit about what those are?
Yes, preservation. When you want to preserve the evidence, one of the biggest things in law is that things get lost. And they sometimes, what is present at the time something happens, sometimes disappear, because governments don't have an obligation to actually keep things for millions of years, despite what community thinks. It doesn't happen that way. So what you want to do is what we do in the law. We send out a letter and ask them to preserve the evidence and to keep it as it is. And then they're required to do that under the law. And we list out those things that we want them to keep. And then if they don't do it, there's a penalty that could be that could happen to it. And that's a part of our investigation stage. And we want to do that because we want to trust the integrity of what the government is going to have to review ultimately in our report, and that we've done what we needed to do to make sure we gather the best information.
Another initiative you mentioned was the legislation at the federal, state, and local level. Has there been any legislation introduced at any of those levels? Any success stories to tell
There
us?
has, and I'm so proud of this. In January, we really started when state legislators started to go into session. We really started to target the state legislation, because that was the hot issue at the time with what had happened with Mike Brown, and then what we saw with the Garner, with the grand jury. Everybody was attacking the grand jury. The grand jury wasn't the issue. It was because you and I both know that a prosecutor controls the room that is in, and if he wanted to indict a ham sandwich, he could. And so it is, you need to, even if a prosecutor did the absolute best he could, if the trust is not there, you're always going to find a reason not to trust him. So we moved that independent investigation, independent prosecutor. We had 5 states to actually introduce. We had Florida, the state of Florida. We had Mississippi. we had Louisiana, we had Missouri, and Texas. But Texas did not, the part of, they introduced the part of the body camera.
Okay.
And some portion, not all of the portion of the independent investigator, independent prosecutor. But yeah, we have had some success story. But you know, Dan, this is a very sensitive issue. The National Bar Association does not have $1 million lobbyist.
Okay.
And we have to understand too, that's not said lightly. The person at the table sometimes get the response. And sometimes, you know, there are some defined structures in place that it's some, you know, we have a day on the Hill that we do, and you guys probably have this also. But we went on a day on the Hill and we try to make a pitch, you know, to Senator Grassley's aide that he really needed to focus on trying to ensure that the federal law that we're pushing get passed. And he said to us, no, I think we should study it some more. I think we actually should gather data and kind of study it. And he says changing the law is not the reason. And this is what I told to him. And this was a week before the thing happened with Freddie Gray. I said, if we don't work together to find a solution, we're going to find ourselves with a civil war.
Right.
Because young people are no longer listening to us say, wait. That's not an acceptable response. I said, so we can work together to have a narrative that brings healing, or we can stand by and find reasons to say why we have to protect police who don't do the job we require them to do, and have other cops who do the job they're supposed to do, be paint with a bash brush. Have one community just be all bad. I have a 14-year-old son. My son is neither a thug, he's not a drug dealer. I live on a golf course. My kid is a straight A student. He's an honor student, but my kid has some swagger to him. And he's very dark. And if you approach him the wrong way, my kid may look at you in the wrong way. But now I'm learning, Dan, though, that my kid may encounter someone. And if he looks at a cop who's in a bad mood or who thinks he's a thug, I may not see my child the next day. So I told him we don't have the luxury of time. And so I hope, you know, that I know you're leaving your office, but I really hope that the Chicago Bar Association and other bar associations really take a look at the legislation that the NBA is offering up and say, there's some things we can join in. We got some traction. I don't know if you know about CBAC. Have you ever heard of CBAC?
Sure.
The Coalition of Bar Associations of Color. We have, as a unit, signed on to some of this federal law, and we're pushing it as a unit.
That's great. President Means, thank you for informing us about the National Bar Association's important initiative to end police misconduct. I'm Dan Cotter. Thank you for watching the Chicago Bar Association's Justice and Law Weekly.
Dan, thank you.